Greetings, fellow travelers, and welcome to the Way of the Showman, where we view the world through the lens of showmanship. I am Captain Frodo, and I will be your host and your guide along the way. And today I bring you another wonderful conversation with Gilligan. In this conversation, it had been a while since we'd spoken, and that meant that we just really laid into it. So today is a long episode, and we are exploring some of the ideas that piqued Jay's interest when listening to episode 103 and 104 of this ongoing exploration of play. So, of the Way of the Showman. He listened to episode 103, 104. He's got some sweet AI-driven app, so he can just push a button as he's listening, and it makes a small little snippet of writing, so he knows to remember. So that he uses them to formulate questions. And the aim of today is to concretize a little bit. Concretize the rather abstract ideas that makes up these episodes. I mean, in themselves, they're not abstract because they're really concrete ideas about play. But the abstract thing is that whilst I am talking about play, I am actually talking about showmanship. And by understanding play, because I believe that play is a form of showmanship, or that showmanship actually is a form of play. And by taking in all these wonderful ideas about what play actually is, we expand our understanding of what showmanship is. And as we comment right towards the end of this episode, we talk about how it might seem like these things are really abstract, but when he asks me the questions that he does in this episode, you do get, I hope, the feeling of how practical the stuff is, and what these ideas then are that he lifts out in this episode. And it is then becomes little aphorisms or little simple plot ideas or bullet points that, although they can seem shallow, they can be unpacked in depth, at great depth. So that is what we're doing today. But so that's the sort of abstract stuff that's going on, which I, of course, immediately latch onto. But what we're actually talking about is, what did I do in my first crowd gathering when I go onto the street in Copenhagen in 1997 and try to get an audience? And that's like, what did I do to get their attention? What did I do to pique their attention? Which hooks did I have in it so that it wasn't just, there was no end in it, so that the audience never felt like they could walk away? All these things we explore are so concrete. I talk a lot about the beginning of a show that I did. It's actually like a corporate kind of event, but Jay was there, so we're talking about that event of how I won that audience over before even starting, or like the techniques, if you will. So parts of this episode today is much more concrete than what the previous episodes are. So it's time to take on the playfulness of episode 103 and 104 and dive into the world of ideas with Jay Gilligan.
Oh, sounds like, is Teddy there in the background barking?
Yeah.
That's and in fact, the famous Teddy from the upcoming episode we're going to talk about.
It is Teddy from the famous episode, and he is here now with 5 other dogs in the circus camp here. We have 6 dogs.
So I had a bunch of things I saved from episode 103 and 104, and for the most part, I would say the things I saved, because you're talking about playing with Teddy, you're talking about playing and your daughter playing, Saskia playing.
Yes.
But so I saved some thoughts from those episodes because I wanted to ask you if you could go into a little bit more depth of these thoughts, more directly related towards performing or towards showmanship or doing a show, like a live performance, basically. And I know we'll probably get there later,
Yeah, but we can foreshadow it now, yeah.
Yeah, or in other ways. But I thought these things were the phrases that kind of jumped out to me, where I was like, oh, wow, if play is like that, then how can we translate that more directly towards the stage or performing? So,
and because I just thought, just a note on the structure of what's going on with these episodes, that which is like the behind the scenes. Why did I write this kind of thing? Because this is now I'm doing exactly what we talked about before, and I might include that little where I ranted about what the Connect and Play episode is about, and about trying to define something, which of course you know from your ongoing relationship and the first episodes of Object episodes, your podcast, excellent podcast with Eric Aubrey. That definition is a huge thing. And how did I get around this? And one of the way that I talk about what play is to, in this episode, I try to lay out in two specific ways to ground the person in what play is. And that's what I'm going to when I'm then in the next episode, where I talk about play in 5 easy steps, which is just a hip or you can't believe what this podcast is about version of saying the 5 criterias of play, which is what it was called, because that's what it's about. But then play in 5 easy steps is a better title, which is the next episode. So in this episode, I try to talk about how can I connect to people so that they really know what play is. Everybody played as children, so I'm talking about bringing this into focus for people in that you played, but that's kind of more abstract. So then I talk about how my daughter plays, and people also often have had playful encounters with dogs. So dogs and children are anyone who owns or interacts regularly with a dog has play in their life, and anyone who has a child, your whole existence gets filled up with play, where stuff is lying everywhere, and what looks to me like a complete mess is an unfinished game that at any time could sprout again. Something that Saskia started to play with and started a game with these two people, and then she's waiting for them to come back, so they're going to keep doing it. They probably never will, but so in this episode I talk about playing in a ways that people will connect to it. And also what I am doing is that I'm seeding, specifically making sure that even though these are real play episodes, I'm making sure that I'm seeding all that you would need to know to have story or easily accessible images for what we're going to talk about in the next episode. So that's what's going on in this episode. And anyway, that was
No, that makes a lot of sense. That's great. Well, so let's just jump into the first thing, and these are all a little bit connected more than normal. So it's maybe going to be more of a flowing one bigger conversation than little discrete moments. But I have a couple of questions here. So you're kind of this is like at the beginning of the episode, and you're doing a bit of a summary, and you say the first thing. This is like relating back to Nale's book a bit too, where it's like the first thing that the performer does when he comes out onto the stage and the audience is there, you want to connect immediately when you come out. You say, I am here, you are there. I acknowledge that you are here, and we're going to create something together. And so what I wanted to ask you about that is that I think generally maybe we unconsciously understand this agreement when we go see a show as an audience member, right? Like you're in some sort of implicit agreement with like, I will give you my time and attention. Like I bought this, I paid a ticket. Here's my little paper ticket. It proves that I transacted money. And I come in and I sit down in the seat, and the chair is facing the performance area. Like this is all organized ahead of time, right? And we all agree with that. It's not confusing to us. Like, why are all the seats facing the same way? Like we all know we are in the audience. But what I really want to highlight here and kind of have you speak about it a little bit deeper is this acknowledgement, like you say, we're going to create something together. And I think from the artist point of view, from the performer point of view, that's really clear. Like, we all know that that's what's going to happen. The performer is going to come out and give the audience something. We always talk about, oh, the Rolling Stones, man, Mick Jagger, he's over 80 years old and he's still giving it his all. Like, we use that word giving, right? And of course, we talk about the audience receiving, and we can talk about how cell phones are distracting in the audience, and Elton John stops the concert to yell at the person with the cell phone because they're not experiencing it in the right way. So we have this idea of giving and receiving, but I think what's really cool here is this idea of creating something together. And that's often overlooked in our language and how we embody or think about being an audience, right? So how do you when you're the performer, kind of how do you let the audience know that we are in this together, and it's not a me against you, it's not me being active and you being passive, etc.? Like, how do you make this together thing? I think that's the important part.
Yeah. I mean, in the ideal sort of performance or so, I guess it's kind of maybe using the, because one thing is when I'm coming in, and that's a situation that you just described. I'm now thinking of that where all the seats are lined up and people have bought a ticket and they come in. And in Las Vegas, when I was working for Mad Apple there with Cirque du Soleil, this is so strong. This, you come in, you've bought your popcorn, the ticket is expensive, it's like $100 or more to come in, so you have a real sense of investment in it, so they are expecting it. But that sometimes what that can do is that they can potentially have the audience sort of sit back and fold their arms.
Yeah, they literally paid the money, so
yeah.
they are owed something in return, and you're the performer, and you're the one who's going to make that money that they spent worthwhile. There's this really big expectation. I mean, and that gets crazier when you go see U2 at the Sphere for $500 or $900, or Adele at Caesar's Palace for $2,000. You know, the expectation is sky high.
Yeah, and then. And that's so this is why we need to align the audience somehow when we're in there. And when I'm a small part of Mad Apple, then I don't have that same control, and it's not necessary with me. So to be able to discuss exactly how that would happen, we would need to look at what all the other performers and what the artistic directors have put into the show of how they met or whatever. So I think we sort of will swap over to a slightly more informal event, but it just highlights what can happen, and that is that the audience comes in and they've paid so much, and and if you're a fan, you come in and you know that this is just a deal, and now we come in and now we really want to get into the show. And to get into something kind of means that you partake in it. You're not, I want to get into it. It's not I want to sit there and see it all and just let it and be external to it. You want to get into it, and the more you get into the concert, the more you connect with the performer and connect with the performance, the more you get out of it. So, but people can forget that sometimes. So they sit there and they go, I've paid the money, they fold their arms and go, now give it to me. Give me all of the $79 worth, or $5,000 or $2,000 worth. And it's like, I'm going to sit there, I'm not going to tap my foot when Adele sings, because you have to give me all my money's worth. So with there, like, that just sort of highlights, I think, what the audience can feel when they come into an event or whatever. And they might not think about it, but if they sit like that, chances are that they can remain unmoved at the greatest performance. If you sit out there and you're going, you better be good, you better give it to me, because there is, and that's why being an audience member is not necessarily as easy as you might think. You're not just sitting there, because it isn't actually passive. it is a conversation. You are less vocal in it, but your participation in this show comes from the receiving and the embodiment of that comes in. You take the material into you and you react, and in your reaction, if you're enthusiastically and lovingly and getting moved by the material, the performer will know and feel this, and the show will be an amazing experience for you. So I lost my thread just there a little bit.
Well, so let me just say though, also conversely, there's also, since we were talking about ticket prices and expectation and the audience's role, you also have the opposite effect many times. Like people go see before the show closed, the Beatles' Love, the Cirque du Soleil show in Vegas. And, tickets, let's say $250 is like average ticket price maybe. And then people are like, man, this show's great. And it's like, it has to be great because you just dropped $250 on a ticket. You don't want it to be bad. And that function can also be seen, like in my life, many times when I was younger, where it was like, oh, hey, let's do a show. Let's just make it free for the audience to come. That way, more people will come. Money won't be a barrier to the access to this show. But in the end, less people come if it's free, because then they go, oh, it's not worth my time. If they're not charging money, it must not be very good. And so you have this kind of dichotomy between all these ranges of experiences for the audience when there's money involved. And,
absolutely.
Yeah.
It has to do with expectation, and it has to do with a sort of investment. Those are the two kind of things. Because so I've talked about this on the podcast a lot, but at the bottom level, what we have when we encounter a show, what we are sacrificing or investing is our time and attention when we get there. But there is, of course, before that starts comes the ticket price and all that sort of stuff beforehand. But the real kind of cash value of what we do is the time and attention that they give to you. And it's true that when you then pay $250, you're going to think that it was great, it was all that sort of stuff, but you might still be a bit detached. So you're going to say that is going to color your thing. And when you see a free event, you're going to go, it was very surprising because it was actually quite good.
Yeah.
Even though it was free or whatever.
Right.
So the fangs of capitalism gets into you no matter what it is that you do, if you could put it in that way. But I do
thinking about this idea that the performer and the audience are creating this moment together.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you can speak about that you notice that you do at the start of a performance, of any type of performance, where you're cluing the audience in that, hey, we're doing this together? It's not just you lean back and I.
Yeah.
And
so that was why. That's exactly right. And I thought that maybe we might have talked about this before as well, but it becomes the go-to kind of thing of shared experience that we've had when you came to visit me in Norway that time, and you and me were doing a gig, but I had another gig booked as well.
Yeah.
And it was for a big group of people who had like their yearly meeting or whatever. And the way that I came into that, I knew some of the things that they had done that day and everything. And I came in and I was introduced, and they were like, oh, Captain Frodo, and probably said it's like, oh, he's lived in Australia and he performed in Las Vegas and whatever they say. And then you come out, but then I'm also actually like, I'm going, hey, going on the enthusiasm of it. But then I actually sort of talked to them a little bit and said, oh, so great. This like I love what your organization stands for. They're basically like they have to do with trekking and hiking all over Norway, which is a huge thing in Norway, trekking, and they build cabins and they do all this stuff. So I knew stuff that they do, and I knew specific stuff that these people had done that day, and I talked a little bit about it. And I'm sure this is like corporate performer 101.
Yeah.
But
no, but that's great. So you say something personal to them, and in one way you bridge the gap. You kind of become not one of them, but you acknowledge that, like, hey, I actually care about you, because you went to the trouble of finding out those facts and like acknowledging it.
But at the same time, also, I'm not just like going, I'm like you or whatever, but all of that talk that I know what's going on with them and what they've celebrated and done today or whatever, it brings us into this moment now. It feels like a little chat, but that was it was a good example, and it worked really well. They really sort of responded to me, and they connected to me instead of me just coming out straight up and just starting the music and going into a routine, which could be that was an example of how I would get all the people kind of into the same moment. And there was still some people coming up, and they had been getting drinks, and I think it had been delayed because of food had taken longer or whatever. And just to sort of go, oh yeah, that's all great, and it's happened, like acknowledging that that's happening, and somebody comes in, and then acknowledging that person when they come in just by going, oh yeah, great, yeah, good, you got beers, is that, are all of those for you, or is it now I'm right in this moment, I am here, you're here, this is your experience, this guy just came up the stairs, and it really pulls us in. We are now in this same moment, and then I'm of course looking for a conclusion of that thing of we are here, you're here, and then once I've done that, then I go, it's like going, oh great, oh, and who am I? And then my opening thing there was my spoon act, which starts with what is the difference between circus and freak show.
Right. So
I talk about myself and then what I do or whatever, and I go and I worked in Australia. That was that. I worked in a freak show, and I worked in circus, and I worked in lots of different things. But maybe you guys don't even know exactly what the difference is between circus and freak show. So now my biographical, I've met you guys, I know your organization, and thanks to the who got me here, and here I am. So now I'm quite specifically, almost in the summary that you read up, I'm doing specifically those things. This is you guys, and I know because I do a lot of trekking, and I walk on this track, and whatever I said, and then this is what you did, and let's give a round of applause to the pensioners who's basically refurbished the whole house. That's now a new cabin for this trekking destination. And then this is you, and now I'm going, this is me, and we're here together. Here's a guy coming up with a beard, and all those things which sound so shallow and so easy or formulaic. If you do those right, they are genuine moments of connection of where we are going, you're here, I'm here, and let me tell you a little bit about myself, exotic locales, doing all this sort of stuff or whatever, going, but then, let me show you, here's this prop, and I'm going to balance it in two ways, and before they know it, it's all crazy, and the spoon is up my nose, and I'm stomping around like a Neanderthal. And then the show has started, and to then have these direct connections back and forth with the audience, with the public, or if somebody goes and the guy who came up with the beers, and you might respond to him again later and go, did you drink all those beers, or still got some left, or we can wait if you go and get another one. So all of that stuff, that's kind of how I do it, and it's easier to see it when I'm doing an event or a show where they are expecting just me, or they just expect a performer or whatever. Because
that's great. That's what I wanted. Like those are some little techniques there. I mean, while we're on the subject of audience, I have to ask you, because I've been I've been listening to a lot of magicians talk lately, and there's a lot of argument about this thing I'm going to ask you. So I wonder what your take on it is. So Frodo, is there such thing as a bad audience? Do you know what I mean?
Yes, I know exactly what you mean, and I'm going. I said, I mean, yes and no, but because they're in one way you can perform for everybody, but there are conditions that are bad to perform under, and sometimes the producer themselves suggest them to you. They go, oh, we want you to come on unannounced in the corner,
with no light. So then no, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about, well, maybe I am talking about that. Like just in general, I would say, so the general opinion I've been hearing lately from the magicians is, because I'm a juggler, so I have to position myself differently. So from the magician, all the magicians are saying there is no such thing as a bad audience. Like every audience, no matter who they are or what the conditions are, it's your job as the performer to make it work, and it's not the fault of the audience. For example, if you were going on unannounced and there was no light and there was really loud music pumping and you're supposed to talk with no microphone, like it's up to you to solve that situation for the audience, and it's not their fault because they didn't ask for any of those things.
And that's completely true, that there is no, and it's also, I do so many shows that I don't care is not the right word, but that's what comes up. It's like the outcome of each individual event in the grand picture of my career as a performer does not make or break me. But I do also know that certain events goes through the roof and they're spoken about or whatever, and other events does not do that. That's not in any way down to the individual nature of any of the people present. But if you come on at a Christmas party and you come on, they've decided to put you on at 1:30 at night.
Yeah.
Then you go, no, there's no bad audience. But if you're doing mentalism at that one and you're going process, and it's like, take this envelope and then open it up, and then there's a number inside, take 2 away, and then think of a person's name and now count the letters up in the alphabet to get, like, now it's not but it's not the right audience for you, and it's not the right situation. But individually, they're never. And so audiences can be bad in terms of that they are not primed to be an audience. If you think of the audience on the street, they don't actually exist. But I start by making them into an audience.
Yeah.
And if I arrive, as I often did on these Wallman's tours, Wallman's doing the Christmas shows, and I quite literally go on at the Christmas party at 1:00 at night to do my act. And the thing there is that if I were to get that to work to the ultimate effect, I kind of need to spend my act at that time there is like 5-6 minutes long, but I kind of would have needed an additional 3 minutes to make them ready to see me.
Right.
Because the material that I have pre-presented as an act that is fitted to music that's put into a program or whatever, and my slot is only 5 minutes, because then comes another 6 singers to do the, like, you can't talk to them and tune them into doing the thing, which is why I sort of swapped to talk about an event where I could do that rather than talk about how I am in Mad Apple, where I am plus minus 20 seconds. And if it's like 30 seconds over, the stage management talks to me afterwards going, is everything okay? Like you were going, something was going. And then I go, oh, it was just this and that happened and I needed that extra time or whatever.
Yeah.
Like it literally is like that. But you can, so that's one thought, that the audience can be badly positioned to be able to receive you or understand what you're doing. You're juggling and it could just be you become in the background because of other things. So that's a way that the audience can be, in quotes, bad. But
well, I think this question, which is kind of a little bit of a trend right now, people talking about, is there such thing as a bad audience, or it confronts that idea of responsibility. Right?
Exactly. Like, so that's exactly that. So that was my next thing. It's because my job when I get out there, and I'm just literally wrote about this here yesterday on it, is we go in, what do they expect from a performance? And they can expect all sorts of things if they know it. But a lot of the time when you're doing an event, and the bad audiences that these people are talking about are really the people who have spent $60 per ticket and now they're going to see you.
They're the people who don't even know that they're going to be an audience.
Yeah, they're often these audiences that you then talk about that are bad. They're not bad, that are difficult for you. It's a difficult performance situation. Your job will always be to fulfill this base level thing of they want to have a good time. Yeah, that's the main thing that they want from you. when they don't know you or whatever. Like if they have come because of a poster, if they've come because of an ad, if they've come because their friends said it, that's one thing. Then they are usually already really a bad audience. They can be harder. Sometimes those audiences can also be harder to win over than others, but they're not bad on the level that you can be when you're on an event and you're thrown into it. But your job will always be to give them the best possible time that they can have. And sometimes your material and your character and personality is not what this group is looking for.
Yeah.
So you have maybe you have a strong sense of irony, and these guys are a real sweet lovey-dovey group of people who goes, oh, this is kind of becoming offensive, but you kill at other events. Or you're at I went to did a function for a bank, and it was all quite fancy and all that, and they were in the middle of eating, and I had the feeling when I had probably done the wrong choice, but I opened with this sword swallowing act, and people were like, this is not appropriate. They were laughing at everything all the way along, and then in the very end, they realized, oh, this is a sword swallowing act. It's not just crazy cucumber chopping out amongst everything. And then I was like, oh, this actually now feels inappropriate to be doing it. Even though that is a great act that whatever works under other circumstances, at that moment, I had not won them over yet. I needed to do something else first. And I've since developed another routine that I now do in those situations. Because if they get me, they'll allow me to do the sword, but I couldn't do it first.
Right.
But for whatever technical reasons, that's how the act needed to go. But I still ended up, by giving them the best possible time or whatever. But I could tell from some of the people sitting around the table, some of the wives there were going like, this is so crazy. Who the hell is this guy? So, but they weren't also a bad audience. And I was fully aware of that from the first after I've done it. So I changed my tune as I went on for the remainder of the another 25 minutes or so that I had of that show. So they were all excited and it was all great. And I took up their boss on stage and did some stuff with him, and it was all exciting and whatever, but it's easier to tune those. So anyway, your point is always to make them have the best possible time. The key lies in the best possible time. Sometimes the best time that you can give them sometimes you can reach 10, but sometimes you can only reach 6 in the best time that you give them, because by the time you finished with your material, I now knew that my opener didn't win them over in the way that it was supposed to. Like they needed more than those 4.5 minutes of the 5-minute first act, because the last 30 seconds is sword swallowing. All the rest others is crazy magic and all this sort of stuff. And I thought that would have won them over. But in that context, it didn't. I needed to have done 10 minutes beforehand or whatever to really win them over. And as a result of that, it felt to me like I hadn't won them over until after I had done my tennis act, and they were all now laughing and it was all good. But then I only had one act left or whatever after that. So in that case, you sort of go, oh, okay, they were not a bad audience, but what I had planned or how I did that specific show was not the right thing. And so I think that's the key. Like your job is always to go, but the audience can also be received at different levels. And some audiences are ready to receive you, and therefore you can take it to 10. But other times you can't quite take it to 10 necessarily. And I think anyone who then says, no, but that's my thing, I take no matter what they are, and I can make them into a 10. And I think that person is either deluding themselves or lying. Because are.
Right. Well, so I think a lot of the things I'm going to talk about coming up here are basically these like kind of dichotomies or these kind of tensions between two opposites. And we can just maybe sum this up here to segue into the next thing by saying that, like, again, just to repeat the quote, I acknowledge you are here and we're going to create something together. So there's something weird there between, like, I'm the performer, you're the audience, I'm in charge, I'm giving, you're receiving, and yet what I'm giving you is also you being actively participating in what's happening It's not just a passive experience. So I find that kind of fun. And this idea that we're going to create something together, this together thing, I think it's rarely talked about, at least using really like clear, articulated language. It's kind of more assumed or unconscious. But let's move on. Let's jump from there to the next thing. It says you catch their attention by giving them the attention.
Yeah.
And so what I think is so funny about that is, I don't know if I've told you about this before, but basically for my whole life, I never, and I still don't, related to this idea of the performer making eye contact with the audience. Like I understand it from a social viewpoint, from an everyday, like if I meet someone on the street and I say hi to them, I'll look them in the eye. I understand that, but there's some sort of function of performing. Maybe when I was a kid, it was overused, or it was just the different style than I related to. But this idea of constantly looking to the audience all the time, I guess there's an element to it for me of some performers where it's also like begging for applause, or kind of like an insecurity of like, are you still with me? Are you still with me? Hey, look at me, look at me. It's like, for me, I'm like, yeah, I get it. We're in, again, you have all those trappings of a theater to focus the attention. You have the chairs facing the same way. You have the black curtains. You have the blah, blah, blah. Like, I don't need to go into that, right? But this idea of like, why do you look at the audience has always kind of, it's been a question on my mind. And I actually interviewed a bunch of performers a ton of years ago, and I asked them, hey, why do you look at the audience? And 90% of the people are just like, well, because that's what you do. And that's the cultural kind of experience we have of performing. When we grew up watching shows, we would go see a show, and the performer on stage would look at us every so often to kind of check in with us or whatever. So we just get used to that. And then when we become performers, we emulate that behavior. But there was one person I asked that gave an answer that's exactly this quote here. I asked Victor Key, the juggler Victor Key. I said, Victor, why do you make eye contact with the audience in your act? Why do you look at the audience? And Victor says, it's just funny how he says it. He was just so matter of fact. He didn't take a second to think about it. He just goes, I come out at the start of my act and I look at every single person at the audience in the eye. I look at all of them. And if you've seen his act in Cirque du Soleil, like in Dralion, he comes out and literally does like a 360 degrees with his head. You know what I mean? Like to look at the whole audience. And he goes, I look at the audience so that they will look at me. And then he proceeds to do his whole act. And I thought it was such a fun, straightforward, matter of fact answer of just like, well, I'm looking at them so that they'll look at me. And obviously that looking at him was the goal. And I mean, in the case of his act, it is the goal, right? But it says, but you said you catch their attention by giving them the attention. And I think that's such a I don't know, to me, it's it's kind of counterintuitive. I know what you mean. I've performed so many years that I can 100% I understand the concept, but like, hey, I want to get their attention. It almost seems like intuitively you would do something like I guess get their attention, like wave your arms or shout or something to catch their attention. But I don't know. There's something I find funny there. Do you have anything to say about catching attention by giving attention?
Yeah. And it comes down yet again to exactly like you made that transition going. It's about acknowledging the shared moment that we have now. And it comes from me thinking that the key thing that's going on in a performance is about time and attention, and that it is about the shared attention. We pay attention to the same thing together, and that is what I am going to show you now. But it's also we share the time. So it's a shared experience which creates the event which we call a show. And it feels to me like a generous thing also when I come out. And even though I say I'd rather talk about that event that I did to describe it, when I come out at Big Apple, at Mad Apple, or come out to do the tennis act, I go, "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone. Good evening, beautiful people." I think I say, "Good evening, beautiful people. It's so good to see you all." It's like I said that those are the first things, and I genuinely look and I take some time and go, "It's so good to see you all." And my name is Captain Frodo, and the way that I say it and the timing that I take, it's like I'm going out and I'm excited, and then I'm looking around a little bit, and then just long enough, hopefully, that they go, "What's going on?" or "What's you about to say?" Like just a moment of anticipation, and I go, "It's so good to see you all here." And I might continue to say more there, like, "Such a great, good-looking bunch of people, especially you guys over there," or whatever.
Yeah.
And yet again, it's to ground that thing in the moment. So I have that moment where I am here and I am so happy to be here with you guys. So I'm giving them attention when I first come out. So in that way, it's quite sort of direct what that is.
I think that's really important, this idea of giving attention at the start of something to get the attention. So, for example, in another style of performing we've all seen, but like you'll see a performer who's doing an act to like a musical track or something, right? And they'll just launch into the act. And I guess the tactic that most people, like the traditional advice I've heard growing up, which is kind of fun to remember, is people say, "Yeah, you always open with your second best trick."
Yeah.
Right. Like you open with your second strongest trick because you're going to do your strongest trick at the end. And I guess it's that effort of trying to get their attention by starting with your second strongest trick. But I think this idea of giving attention to get it is something that is, again, not really spoken a lot about a lot in my world, and definitely like just thinking about, again, teaching at these contemporary circus schools. That's really nothing I've ever heard spoken outright. I think, again, it's maybe an unconscious thing that we all kind of embody as performers. And I mean, you look around at other people performing and you kind of take that in, and it kind of becomes part of you. I get it. It's organically known, but it's really rarely explicitly stated. So I think it's an important point to say. If you want to get attention, you give attention. And that's a basic human part of the human experience. I think that's pretty straightforward.
Yeah. And it also has, of course, something to do with my style of performance as well. And part of the reason why I do that is that I think that this genuine way of doing it, which now when I can deliver it down in just a line or whatever, when I'm coming out at Mad Apple, or when I am at a big 1,300 seater, when I'm doing a small venue, then some of that intimacy is already there, even more so. So you don't have to go as hard. But that also becomes a skill, and it is one of my skills that I usually can relate to the audience and make them relate to me. And that's what I'm sort of trying to formulate into this of being there together. So it's, there are many ways of kind of thinking about this, but some of the stuff that you were talking about looking at the audience, to me it's also because I come out and then I address them. Almost, I don't really do any act where I come out and start by doing an act in silence. I always come out and talk to them, and when you are talking to someone, then it is also natural to look at them.
Sure,
but
exactly.
When that's just the nature of it, or whatever. And knowing how to look and what people do when you talk to people, and you talk and you look at them at their eyes, they start looking at your eyes. Magicians use that by almost blunt force misdirection. You just ask a question and they look up, and then you put all the coins in your pocket when they're not looking.
Right.
So knowing how people function, that's also, I come out and I try to be quite, I am a human being and you're a human being, so now I'm talking and I'm looking and I'm using all the things that humans do. We come out and talk. When you come out, or when the classic juggler comes out, they don't talk. So it's already a more sort of theatrical presentation, just but they come out and they do. So what do you do? And coming out and acknowledging their existence is not always done in all shows, and it has to do with what the level of the fourth wall or whatever. But in all of what I do, the reason why I do it is because, to me at least, the strongest connection that I can forge with the audience comes by doing that. I connect most deeply to them when I connect to them as much as one human being to another one as I can. And the time limitation is always on that, because you can't say hello to everybody and make that sort of stuff. But you might get that when you're doing a workshop where you're later on, you're so tuned with your or at school when you're teaching, that they know you so well that very small things can be very funny or very strong or very, because they like you're laughing with your friends or whatever. So you want to make try to make a shortcut to get to that kind of level of intimacy with them as fast as you can. And if you come in, don't acknowledge them. Do your 7-ball cascade, and because you got the reverse cascade, which is your kicker for your second best trick, or your best trick or whatever. So you start with the 1 or whatever, and then you got the other one saved for the end. And you don't acknowledge them, then you sort of go, well, that's totally fine. But now they have to, or you're telling them to watch. Extreme example, but now you can fold your arms, you can sit back in your seat and just watch you like you watch a film, because you don't acknowledge them and they don't need to acknowledge you. I teach them within the first couple of moments of how I want them to react, and I want a very participatory kind of event. I ask them questions, I make them laugh, so that's a kind of call and response. I say a joke, you laugh. It sounds idiotic when you say it like that, but I do something stupid, and then I throw some confetti to tell them that was supposed to be like that. It's okay. This is or whatever you want to call it. That then they laugh, and that is a participatory act where they need to engage in it. Like a stand-up comedian, we need to warm them up and get them in. You're supposed to laugh, but as you've already said, it's like by the time they come in, they know it's supposed to be funny. So just coming out onto the stage and going, hey, putting a funny face and putting your arms out might already make them laugh, because it's supposed to be funny, so they know that. But you still have to create and foster that thing.
No, I like what you said. You say you're teaching the audience. Eric and I talk about that a lot in our shows for the kids. We perform for kids here in Sweden, right? And oftentimes, if we make a new show and we'll take it out on the road for the first time, and we'll have a conversation at some point where we're like, oh, actually, we need to build an applause point in earlier in the show so the kids get into the rhythm of applauding for the rest of the show, because that's the intention, that we engage them, in certain ways like that. And then if you have a new show and you're like, okay, they're going to clap here, but then they don't, and if they miss that first applause point, then the rest of the show they're just quiet, right? Because you haven't taught them, or you just don't have this agreement between yourself and the audience that this is what's going to happen next. And I think so that idea of teaching, it's good. And so I think about Luke Wilson too, who wrote the book Tactile, which was just reprinted, by the way. If people want to get Luke Wilson's book Tactile, you can find it on the internet. But Luke,
send me a link and I'll post it in the show notes.
Great, yeah. So Luke, the great juggler, who sadly passed away, but he always said at the start of an act, and this is what I mean in terms of like talking about giving attention to get attention. This is not the language of my world where I come from, because like in my world, again, it's more of a technical thing. Hey, you're going to make a new act. What trick are you going to do at the start? That's the conversation. And it's nobody's ever, since I was a kid, man, nobody came up to me and was like, oh, you're going to make a new act? Remember, you got to give the audience some attention if you're going to get attention. Or nobody's ever said, hey, you have to teach the audience at the start of your act how you want them to interact with you for the rest of the act. But it is so important. And so what Luke used to say he goes, at the start of the act, you want to, when you come on stage, first of all, you just have to know in your mind that people are trying to figure out who you are. Like, who are you? So that includes like, what do you look like? What color is your hair? How tall are you? How are you dressed? What kind of shoes are you wearing? How old do you appear to be, or how young do you appear to be? What kind of demeanor or aesthetic are you going for? Are you looking like are you dressed in a certain cultural style?
Yeah.
And so if you just come out running across the stage in a whirlwind, which can be an effective thing, don't get me wrong, but in this case, maybe that's a bad thing because the audience can't really focus on, because the first thing we do as humans when somebody walks in a room, we have that lizard brain that makes you just glance your head even unconsciously, right? If we're having a meeting and the door opens, we're all going to turn and look at the door, and that's just like an instinctual habit we have as humans. And so this idea that you come out on stage and you don't acknowledge that people have a basic human need to for them to figure out what they're looking at, or who they're looking at, I mean, that's number one. He said, like, it's really important that that doesn't mean you have to come out and just stand there, but
No,
you
no,
just have
no,
to maybe
no.
keep it in
But
the
just being aware that this thing will happen. It's
Yes, exactly.
you will be
Then you can,
judged as a kind of character, no matter whether you
right.
put attention into it or
There
not.
you go.
It doesn't
There you
matter.
go.
They will judge you, or not judge you, but they
No.
will read you, and they will look at you, and they will get the
Yeah.
clues that they get from it. And if you have consciously not thought about those, their first meeting might then be confusing, convoluted. It might not make much sense. It might make them
Yeah.
think, did I pay money to get this guy? It doesn't look like or he just
Yeah.
randomly came up, like whatever. So
Well, so then the next part of it, he said, was, so you have to know that people are gonna try to figure out who you are. And the next thing is so he always said the first 30 seconds of the act, because he worked in German variety all the time. He said the first 30 seconds of the act is make or break. That's when they decide if they're going to watch you or not. And because of course in German variety, very often they're eating food, they're drinking beer. They're not just there riveted by any small theatrical movement. They're there with their friends. They're there to have a night out of fun.
and some of
And
them
they're
might be sitting in a chair which is not ideally positioned because they're
yeah,
round tables. So
round
you
tables.
literally, it's not
Yeah,
like the ideal situation you describe where everyone is facing the thing. People
you're
might
right.
need to. I mean, usually it's you might only have to adjust a little bit because the producers want everyone to be able to see, but you might have to readjust yourself to properly see the performance. So yeah,
Absolutely. So in the first 30 seconds, people are going to decide, do I want to take the energy to watch this or not? Like in a more engaged way, right?
yeah,
And so he said, so once people kind of figure out who you are, you have to let them know what you're going to do. But if you give away the entire game from the beginning, you're going to lose everyone. So you want to be, in one way, like, you want to give a hint about what's to come. Like, hey, if you guys keep watching me, you're going to see stuff like this. But you don't want to, at the same time, in that first 30 seconds, you don't want to be like, hey, if you keep watching me, you're going to see me do X, Y, and Z. And then the audience can go, oh, I understand. And then just like check out because you just gave it away in the whole first 30 seconds. So, but this idea, again, talking
yeah,
about giving attention to get attention, that was never in that conversation with him. He was talking about it from more of course, a theatrical standpoint, but more of a technical standpoint. As a juggler, right? You're saying, hey, you want to give them a taste of what's to come. You want to give them a hint of your personality, but you don't want to give away everything. You need to save. You need to have enough of a mystery and an intrigue that keeps drawing their attention forward. So I
yeah.
think that's one viewpoint into this kind of like, how do you start a performance? But this idea of like giving attention to get it is also equally important. And
But
I
it's
think that, and
to me,
I'll just sum it up, and or I'll finish up and say that, like, no matter which viewpoint or which, entry point into this conversation you choose, either your words into it or Luke Wilson's words into it, for me personally, I think the fun part is, like, if you would come to me now and you say, hey, Jay, you have to give attention to get attention, I would go, oh man, that's awesome. I know what you mean. And I would take it as a creative challenge. Like, so what are all the different ways I can give attention? It doesn't necessarily just mean that we have to come out and look at people or we have to come out and speak. You can do all those things, but maybe there's a million other different creative. Do you know what I mean? Like
yeah,
it doesn't have to be one way. And that's the same thing for Luke when Luke said, when you come out, the people are gonna try to figure out who you are. That doesn't mean you have to come out and stand on stage and not move for 10 seconds. So it's like, oh, okay, if people are gonna try to figure out who I am and what I appear to be, how can I play with that as a fun way to engage that principle with the audience? That's always kind of my personal thinking, like, oh, is there a fun, creative way I can do that really personally, as opposed to like a strict rule that you have to follow. But anyway, that's my spiel.
No, I think all of what Luke said in your words here is all fully compatible with that same thing. I'm looking for a language that, or I don't know about looking for, but I'm using a language that seems like it's more foundational. So after you have said you gotta give attention to get attention, basically we have to know that we're in a reciprocal situation of give and take attention here, where I will catch it just like that, and that will be your chance to respond by applause or whatever. And so his words are more almost like practical. So after you've said my statements, which I feel like I'm trying to be more foundational or be so that you can they will be valid across juggling and magic and all of it,
right?
and within theater and within politics and as a teacher, that this is the same foundational thing that happens. And when you come out and you're gonna do your TED talk, or you come out and you're gonna do your class where you're teaching 7th grade history, you meet the same situation, but your solutions for getting the optimal amount of attention and for sharing your material will be different in each situation, and not just between the teacher and juggler in the two different situations that they have, but also the teacher from day to day as well, because you need to adapt and adopt the situation into what it is that you're teaching, and you need to be doing that when you're a performer too. So I totally agree that with everything that Luke said, and they all feel like specific solutions to the thing, and excellent things to take into account whenever you perform. To come out, be aware of what you're wearing and all of that. And also, I just thought that when you were talking about how, do you come out and look at people and all of that? And no, I don't need to do that as a rebellion against. You have to wear a bow tie, and if that's what it said, Dave Gilligan, the complete juggler, come out, say a joke, say your name, straighten your bow tie, and smile, or whatever. Right. It's like whatever, and then you go no, and you became who you were as a juggler and in the community because of some of the attitudes that you had. But I don't know if that is not an approach that I think that comes out of juggling. The fact the skill that you did, because you can do the same thing if you come out to do handstands, and you can do the same thing if you come out to let's just stick with this handstand and juggle, because if you come out and then you go, here I have a deck of cards, I'm shuffling them, and I would now like you to pick a card. If you don't look at them, then there's something. Then you're creating a lot. It's socially awkward, and it's a weird situation. If you come out and you're asking things of people specifically, and you're not acknowledging them, now it becomes either something that you're building towards, or this person doesn't know how to engage. They're on the spectrum somehow, and you sort of go, oh, this is weird. Like, oh, he's only focusing on his tricks, and I don't know if I want to see a card trick. Like, that level of connection with people demands a different thing. And so coming out but if you did illusions and you don't actually interact on a proper, or not a proper, but on a direct one-to-one, and that can include the whole crowd and you. I'm talking most of the time to the whole crowd as one. And my goal is, when I start the show, if I'm doing a half an hour, 1 hour show myself, I am unifying them. And at some point, the many becomes one, and they really start to act like a group. And the 30 seconds that Luke talks about, that is that within those first anything from 10 seconds to a minute or whatever, they take on the kind of personality. And it has actually started all the way before, while they stood in the line to get in, while they were, all of those things help shape them. The music that has been played outside has all is part of shaping them into who they are. And sometimes that might mean, then we're going back to the 1 out of 10, the audience comes in and they might be on 0 some days. It's been raining and they came there, and then they've had a boring event, and now you're being thrown at them. And they're actually, they want to go home, but the producer said, or the organizer said, you have to watch this guy before you go home. So they're just waiting for you to finish. But if you're in a theater and they're here and it's exciting and I've heard something good, and then you've curated an awesome playlist that happens beforehand, and maybe even you have some pre-show, or you have something that you go, the ushers, you have them ask them stuff, or like, or you are out there, like by the time the show starts, now maybe the audience is at 4 or something, and you if your show can always reliably lift them by 6, you will now be able to lift them to 10. So I don't know. When you come out, I lost track of where that led, but it started with juggling and looking, and how you can not look. So in certain levels of contacting the audience, you do need to look at them for it not to be awkward. So
sure.
Specific more even, because you can come out and you can dazzle them with skills, and then at the end of that, but it's, if you're going to do more than just one act, if you're doing a long presentation of yours, you will need to look at them and acknowledge them as an audience at some point. And that's just, with me, I'm grabbing that front and center to make the audience and me and our rhythms and our ways of interacting, this is the core of what's going on. I have crazy things to show you, but the core thing that drives us through here is that I understand that you just want to have a good time. I understand that as long as you guys are having a good time, everything is great. And then you will allow me basically to do whatever I want. I can say something moving, I can do something whatever, but that's the bottom line that we talked about in the beginning of that's their expectation. And now I can ask you, because I've asked you a couple of times. You say that a show is a mix or whatever of what the audience wants and what the performer wants. Say that in your words, because I am already quoted you in what I'm writing, but it's my paraphrasing of it. So I'd like to just hear what you actually say.
So it comes from this idea that people use the word compromise as a negative thing normally. They'll say, oh yeah, I had to compromise my morals or compromise my integrity. But I always thought that compromise in this quote or this thought is a good thing. And that is this idea that a show is what the audience thinks they're going to see versus what you want them to see or what you want to show them. I mean, basically, it's like the audience is going to come see a show, and so they think they're going to see a show, and they have some preconceived notion about it. I mean,
exactly.
It's impossible not to. Even if the preconceived notion is, I have no idea what it's going to be. That's a preconceived notion that can be confronted or not, right? Like they like, oh man, I'm going to go see this juggling show by Jay Gilligan. I have no idea what it's going to be, and then you show up and then they're like, oh, I know exactly what this is. You know what I mean? Like, it's like you can also fail that expectation. No, but basically it's like it's what the audience thinks they're going to see versus what you want to show them. And then what you want to show them, you have to make sure that that's what they're going to actually see. Because for many performances, what happens is the audience watches the entire show through their preconceived notion, and they never drop it. They never actually see what you want them to see. They will see something in your performance, and they might love it or whatever. That's kind of inconsequential. But the point is that you're trying to do something else, and they're seeing another thing in that experience. And so for me, when you do a performance, the creative part of the performance is how do you resolve those two wishes, what the audience thinks they're going to see versus what you want them to see. And then it's the creativity comes in the compromise between those, and maybe instead of the word compromise, we can just say the word acknowledgement. You acknowledge that the audience wants to see or thinks they're going to see a certain thing or wants to see a certain thing. Yeah. So in what way do you acknowledge that? So I can give a couple of concrete examples. And one is like, I did this thing called Shoebox Tour America. I did it in a bunch of different countries, but we did Shoebox Tour America for 7 years. And I would take different jugglers from all over the world, from Japan, from Europe, and we would tour America. And of course, we were like, generally, I would bring really hyped up jugglers, like hyped jugglers. And so we would get a bunch of juggling enthusiasts as our audience in every city. And so I don't know if you've ever experienced that. I mean, you're a juggler too. So you know that energy of a crowd that's full of a bunch of specialists who are going to see that thing that they are interested in. They're just like vibrating with, oh my God, they're going to do all the tricks. They're going to do, oh my God, they're going to do the thing. And they're so hyped up about what they expect they're going to see that they're not even in the real moment. They're still in their fantasy. Even they're in the room during the show. They're not watching the show that's happening. They're watching the show that they're imagining is going to happen.
It's the person who's bought the $700 ticket who's just, this is so fun. Sure. This is so awesome. This is so cool. And and the show is vibrating on a different level, but you're in a different, you're not receptive to exactly what's going on. Yeah.
So a couple of ways we dealt with it was like, I remember one, we had a, but the thing was I knew this. And so every year for 7 years, we do a different cast, a different show, different tour. But every year I had a different tactic to acknowledge we were going to be in front of an audience that had this energy. And we would try to dissipate and dispel that energy. Like I wanted to destroy it. I wanted to kill that energy because I wanted them to see what we were actually going to do. Because I knew that what we were actually going to do, they were going to actually love if they would just open their eyes and drop their preconceived notions of what we were supposed to do. And so, for example, one year we just did all the juggling gags that are kind of like, I don't know if it's like public domain, but it's like we just did all this stupid, like you come out with like nine tennis balls stacked up against your chest, like you can barely hold them. And then you start juggling them, but you see they've been glued together in groups of 3. Yeah. So juggling 9 tennis balls and then, just stupid. Oh, and then you come out with a knife and the knife is in a sheath, like a knife holder. And you whip out the knife and you show the knife and then you drop it and you juggle the knife holder, the sheath. Just stupid gags to like diffuse the tension in the room of like, oh my God, it's Wes Peden. He's going to juggle 7 club back crosses. And then it's like, but then Wes comes out and we actually do this little like, I forget, what did we do? Anyway, whatever, right? Like you diffuse that tension of like what you're supposed to be according to their preconception, and then you kind of bring everything down to 0 in one way, so that you can build it up to what it actually is going to be for real.
Yeah,
and
it's the opposite of what most shows are like, in a sense, because you're getting people who are so excited or whatever, but it's still talking about exactly the same thing, about leveling with your audience and bringing them into a shared experience of what's happening in this moment and what is going to happen as we go forward.
I mean, for sure, there would be many different tactics to take. That was one form. I did on that project of how to acknowledge, how to, in one way, compromise. Because like, did I want to go out?
It's all that's also, this is like another. It's every situation will be different, and this specific thing where you put some of the hottest jugglers in the world together, and then you come in, and all these juggling enthusiasts are there, and you need to somehow allow for them to tune into what's actually going on. And this is specifically about the kind of attention of how you meet people.
Right. Well, I don't know. Bobby May, the great old juggler from vaudeville, Bobby May. He used to bill himself on the posters of vaudeville. His name would be Bobby May or He May Not. It never said Bobby May Juggler, because Bobby May thought that people might not like juggling. but he knew that if they would see his act, if he could get them to see his act, they would like juggling.
Yeah.
And so he would say, Bobby may or he may not. And he opened the act by playing harmonica for 2 minutes. So people would go, oh, here's the guy. Oh, what's he going to do? Oh, he's going to play harmonica. That's kind of cool or whatever. And then it's like an old bait and switch. And so people are like, oh, that guy with the harmonica, he's pretty cool. And then he would start his juggling act. And that's another way to acknowledge and say, oh, I don't know if it was true or not, but like in his mind, and obviously it was true enough for the market he was in at the time. In his mind, he goes, oh, people think they're going to see juggling. They might not like it. Maybe they've seen a lot of bad jugglers lately, but I know I'm a good juggler. But how can I get them to watch me if I can't just say like good juggler, because no matter how I say the word juggler, they're just going to have this previous experience of maybe a bad feeling. So then he just didn't say he was a juggler. And that's a way to, again, I can say the word compromise, right? Like, did I necessarily want to go out and juggle 9 tennis balls glued together? Like, not really. That's not like in terms of my, how would I rather spend my time with us together showing you something? It's like, well, maybe I have other things I'd rather show you. But at the same time, I acknowledge that if I don't show you those tennis balls glued together, you're not going to see what's going to follow. So at the end of the day, I would much rather take the time at the beginning of the show to come to an agreement with you, so that later on in the show you can actually see what I want to show you. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to like what I have to show you, but at least I want to give it a fair shot that we're on the same page.
On a small scale, that's what the good MC or a ringmaster is supposed to do. It's to dissipate the energy or flow on with the energy, depending on, so that each act gets situated in the best possible way. And then what you're talking about too just shows what is so important in my thinking is to take the audience's experience seriously and to think about that, not just think, do I want to do this trick and then that trick, or should I throw 2 behind the back before I do this? But to go, what is the effect that you want the audience to have? Because if your base role is to make sure they have a good time, if your base role is to give them the best possible thing that juggling can give them, then you want to maximize the impact and the effect that what you do has on them. And you can only do that by picturing in your mind what the or you can't only do it, because you can just go out and do some shit and then see what happens. So see what sticks. But the way that you will most effectively work is if you are aware of what the choices that you've taken. And you just told here now that gluing tennis balls together is not what you normally would do. But what that shows is that you are putting the audience experience ahead of the exact trick that you wanted to do. It's because you want to get them into a certain point. And that, I think, is then you're miles ahead of most people who only think, oh, this is a cool trick. Do you think I should do this first, or other, like the card trick or whatever? And you don't have any other. But then you go, well, what is the overall thing that you want to create? What is the experience that you want to create?
Yeah, and I think there's a real distinction here, because a lot of people, I think, you can swing this concept in the other direction to the extreme, which is, I've met people when I was younger, when I was a teenager, and they said, oh, I only do what the audience wants to see. I'm only there to serve the audience. I have no place in any of this. I'm just a servant of the audience. And of course, we don't need to go into examine all of that statement, but this idea that, like, first of all, you would know exactly what the audience wants to see, that's clearly not true. And second of all, that you have no desire from yourself to give anything other than what they want to see, then it's just like, I think that's so like,
yeah, it's useless advice, and it's an extreme of it. So it's like it's weird because you gotta have
you want to say something. You have to have something that you want to show them. You have to you have to want to show them something, and that's
and you have to have that prepared. So
yeah.
he doesn't go out and just do what they want. He doesn't come out and go, "Hey guys, what do you guys want to see? I'm going to do whatever you want to see." That's not true. Because if they do, then you go, no, but it's going to have to be within the realm of juggling, and it's going to have to be one of the routines that I have that are actually good. So I
have to keep my clothes on and whatever.
When you get and even that they say, oh, we want you to take your gear off. If you have genuinely started a conversation, then you got to be prepared to actually give it. So you're not actually there just doing that. And anyway, the audience comes there and they're expecting, once they give you your attention, give you their attention, that you have something to show.
But you're
prepared that with them in mind, but they don't want to make the choices or the.
No, but you're being too generous here. That's not even what these people are doing. You're being way too. You're even farther ahead than they are in your example, because you're talking about, in one way, fictionally asking an audience, like, hey guys, welcome to my show. I'll do whatever you want. Like, what do you want to see? Like, in this conceptually, fictional way. These people are even worse, because they're sitting at home and the conversation goes like this. The internal dialogue is like, oh man, should I juggle my 5-ball multiplex pattern? Nah, people don't want to see that. They'd much rather see 3 knives. Oh, should I, hey, I have this really cool idea with like a dart gun and like a balloon, and nah, they would much rather see me juggle 3 apples and eat the apple. Like, they are, projecting onto the audience. And so that which rounds out nicely and does a nice little callback here in this conversation to that idea of like why I was kind of alienated or am alienated from looking at an audience. I think it's because early on, when I was a kid and a teenager, I found people's performances, or many people, to be condescending. I felt like I was being condescended. It's that idea where the performer doesn't give the audience any credit to be interested in what they're doing. I had advice, Frodo. I literally had a guy when I was a teenager who told me, you always have to remember the audience is bored and stupid. And you have to keep that in mind all the time. And yeah, if you think that the people you're performing for are, number one, bored by what you're doing, then yeah, I guess you have to constantly keep staring them in the eye so that they'll keep looking at you.
Keep number 2, paper bags and keep shouting and keep
and if you think they're exactly. And if you think they're stupid, it's that exact same internal dialogue of like, well, what do I want to show them? Oh, no, that's not important. I should just show them what they want to see. But I'm going to reflect on what they want to see before I meet them, say that they'd rather see 3 knives rather than this poem that I tell while I juggle 3 bags or 3 whatever balls or whatever. So and just to say, I mean, isn't it the Penn and Teller quote? I guess it's usually attributed to Penn, this idea that you have to think that the audience is at least or more smart as you.
Yeah.
So you want to approach the performance, and you want to say, oh, everybody in the audience is and that's the other thing that somebody told me. It's not a Penn and Teller quote, but it's like you have to think that the audience is at least as interested in juggling as you are, of what you're presenting, right? Like, as a premise. I mean, we're not talking in reality. Nobody's as interested in juggling as me. Don't get that wrong. But do you know what I mean? That you have to come out with the confidence to be like, what I'm doing has the possibility to be as interesting to all these people as it is to me. Or then what's the point of showing it? Like, I don't get it.
Yeah. And that's right. I think Avner the eccentric said in his he has a list of some stuff, and he says the key to being interesting is being interested.
Right. Yeah.
And coming out, and if you present your material as if it's important and you genuinely care about it and you're interested in it, it's already interesting to other people. You're not as unique as you think.
Right. Yeah, no, that's great. No, that's true. I've heard that before too. Yeah, that idea that like you have to be interested in what you're doing first of all. And that's and just to say, I mean, now we're really going on a tangent here, but like, in one way, it kind of shocks me the number of professional performers whose main discipline is juggling. I'm always shocked at how many of those people don't like juggling, and they're not interested in juggling, like in general in their lives. They're past it. They're over it. It's just a mechanical way for them to make a living, which is fine, like no judgment. But it does kind of shock me that they're able to do it because, like you say, if you go in front of an audience, what you give them, maybe the first rule of thumb is like, you yourself have to be interested in what you're doing. Eric always says, this is so funny. I forgot about this. But whenever me and Eric go see a show and there's something like, let's just say bad going, or like what we think is a bad performance, Eric will always turn to me and be like, can you imagine if that person had to sit in the audience and watch themselves doing that? Like, and it's actually a really good rule of thumb. I think of it a lot. Like when I'm in rehearsal and I'm making a show and I'm just like, wait a second, what if I was in the audience watching this moment? Would I like to see this? And it's a good rule of thumb to kind of like a yardstick, a measuring stick by which to judge what you're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's also, it can be amplified by this idea that you should film your performances, and after you've done the performance, you should watch it. Because it's extremely rare to hear somebody goes, it's like, oh man, I like performing, but I really like watching a video of myself doing shows.
Right.
Because people like, oh no, I don't like to watch my own shows. I don't like to watch me perform. And you're going, no, but you should. Because you are your own worst critic. And if you keep watching this video and eventually you even like it, then you have something that you're genuinely proud of or whatever.
I had to make a rule when I was younger. And the rule was I had to perform a thing once before I watched it on video. Because I found I was just such a, crazy person that like, because I would film stuff before I performed it and I was just never happy. I was like, oh, this is bad, this is bad, this is bad. And I would just never perform it. And then it got to the point where I was just like, no, okay, wait. You're not allowed to watch anything on video until after the first show. Because I think also there's so much of a first performance that solves so many theoretical problems before something goes on stage that you're just in your studio and you're like, how's the audience going to react to this? Maybe like this, maybe like that. And you just don't know. But you can just go around in circles in your head and defeat yourself. Whereas like if you put it in front of an audience, there's that survival mechanism.
That's right. And I'm talking about filming your performance, not filming yourself beforehand.
Yeah, no. I just remembered that I had that rule.
So then you look at the response from the audience and you can judge it. And the idea would be not ever to throw it out, because what you've made is what you've made. And the idea would now be to look at that thing and go, okay, if we can't just say, oh, that was cool or that was shit, we have to go, which specific bit, what is it about it that you don't like? What is it about you do like? We got to amplify the good and turn down the shit. And eventually you will have something that you, after, if you watch the 10 performances and you make it the bit that you like a little bit better and the bit that you don't like a little bit better, eventually you'll get something that you'll tolerate. And hopefully, if you're a good creator, you will be able to create something that you actually go, yeah, this bit is as good as I can make it. Because any other that I would add to it will change it. Like, it would be cool if I wore a gold suit. Okay, but that's not this act. That's going to be something else. Or it'd be cool if I juggled knives. And you go, yeah, but then this is not a ball juggling routine anymore. So that's a different thing. So you stick to the thing and you tune it. That was the idea of that.
No, I've since gotten over my little rule. Of course, I film things all the time now before I perform it, but I also understand now how to watch, like what you were just saying. Like,
it's
I understand, what to get out of that experience. But anyway,
so that's good.
Should we jump to the next the next
Yeah,
idea?
we should do, and we should probably finish up as well. Like we're going on. How many? You have only gotten through the first 2 questions, or? And there's
Exactly.
12? No. Let's move on. That's great.
Yeah, I'm just seeing. Oh yeah. Well,
You,
yeah.
you have
Let's do
caught
one
up
more.
for
Let's
so
do one
long.
more for now.
Yeah. No,
Let's.
just we. It's been so long since we caught up that it's like
Yeah.
we did speak for an hour and a half or so before this as well.
True.
But so it's just going in all sorts of directions, which is fun. Which I guess
All
is
right.
fun.
This is kind of a bigger theme that comes back a lot. So let's see. Yeah. So you're talking about what play is, and there's a few different lines here, so I'll get through all of them. Just it's all around the same idea. It says that play is not a thing. It's not a thing in itself. It's a process. It's a process that's more like a mode of experiencing and interacting with reality. And then it goes on to say, so play is not a thing in itself, but a mode of experience. It's a way to experience the world or a way to interact with reality. And the reason that jumped out to me is because I have that line. I have that one line in Reflex at the end where I say, juggling is not a painting or a sculpture. It's a process that happens through the passing of time. And I never really realized it until I heard you say this on the podcast. But like you say here, play as a way of experiencing the world. And for me, that's also juggling. Like when I say that juggling is a process that happens, it's a process. I guess what I meant, and I never said it in the right way or like fully out until I heard this quote on your podcast where you're like, it's a way to experience the world. And that's exactly what I meant when I tried to say it in Reflex, where I was like, it's a process. What I meant was a process on a global scale, on a worldview kind of scale. So I think it's kind of fascinating, this idea of like, first of all, that we're trying to like in your series now, you're trying to talk about play, or you are talking about play, but you're trying to explain what it is. And like you say, it's so hard to talk about things like when it's a process. It's not a thing that you can just point to and just encapsulate with one gesture and say, this is play, and like you just point to it and there it is. It's like it's a process that happens through, I don't know, like you say, it's a way to experience the world. It's a way to interact with reality. And I think I've asked you this before on these little talk back sessions about the current series. Let me formulate a question then out of this, which is interacting with reality. So what is reality then in the context of this? And we don't have to get so crazy big about it, but just like, if play is this process and it's a mode of experiencing the world and interacting with reality, what can you tell me a little bit more about what you mean by it's a way to interact with reality? Because I mean, for me, there it starts to call into question then, and maybe I'm thinking too deeply about it, but like calls into question, what do you mean by reality exactly? Or like, how does play interact with reality? Can you riff on that a
Yeah.
little bit?
I mean, it's a huge thing to try to say what reality is, but
Yeah.
I'm talking about the world, about life. So my daughter and my wife is part of my life. They're part of reality as living entities, paying bills, going to the shop. All those things are part of reality. But I do believe, just like you said about juggling, that juggling is it works on all levels. But reality, I don't think that reality is something that's being wholly created inside my head. Full idealism, that there's no, I think that there's a real world out there. But I do think that there is more to that real world and that I can only see parts of it. And I interact with it in a certain way based on myself. I am in a relationship with all the different aspects of the world. I'm in a particular kind of relationship with my wife and with my daughter and with paying my bills and everything else. So, and a process is always also a relationship. a process is not a thing. It's an interaction between elements, whether it is a chemical process or it's a relationship process or it's your health. That is a process that's ongoing. So I think that reality is a process in itself. And the understanding of reality, or the understanding of the world or so that we have, is in part colored by us and our way of relating to it. So the way that I relate to my wife as opposed to my mother or to you is shaping who I am to you, because I am all of those things. When I say I am, then I am actually to you something else than someone else. So you see me in a different way than every other person does, and I am all of those things to all of those people. And I'm also myself. So this is just this sort of like pluralism of all this sort of stuff. So,
and you've talked about that before in terms of performing for an audience, and that the audience has that same experience of pluralism.
Yeah. And so that's why I separate. When I come out onto the stage, they don't meet Frodo, they meet a character, because that character, but in a sense, every person that meets me, you meets me as a character, and everyone meets me as and that character is then a particular aspect of you, which comes to life only in my relationship with you, only in my relationship with my wife. Am I like that? Only in my relationship to performance am I like how I am, or whatever. And it's quite foundational, and it's something that this guy talks about in the Researcher's Ceremony as well. And it's a part, and I heard it in Sand Talk, an Aboriginal fella that wrote the book also. So the Aboriginal experience, or the indigenous experience of the world, is totally different than ours. And there's then in this book that he talks about quite strong relations between the Aboriginals in Canada and Aboriginals in Australia, of how they live a deeply relational. They have a deeply relational understanding of reality. So that all boils down to this thing, that this can be fundamental. It's not about the things. It's not about the individual 2 hydrogen atoms and the oxygen atom, because they next to each other are just that. But you put them together and a new thing of water comes into being. And that is from the relationship between those things. So play is a mode of experiencing the world. Play is a way to interact with reality, interact with the world as it comes to you, interact with other people, interact with other things. And you can, and so that's what we're trying to describe. What then are the characteristics of this mode of approaching the world? Are you approaching the world factually, and this is this and this is that and this is separated out, and this is the fact about this, and this is how much it weighs, and this is how about or where it sits exactly located? You do all of those things, and those are true, and that's a material kind of way of thinking. You're focusing on things as things, and that is true from a certain point of view. A mountain is a mountain, but like the Zen thing goes, it's like, before I was enlightened, a mountain was a mountain. Then a mountain stopped being a mountain, and then it's a mountain again, or whatever. It's this sort of push and pull kind of in your change of it, and all the while, like, it's because it is. But a mountain is also a process. It just takes a lot longer. It will remain itself for longer than what I will remain myself, or remain then a being. And you can say I'm a thing, but I'm also a process. You stop putting food into me and I dissipate very, very quickly, food and water, and I will stop existing. So what we then as human beings can do, you have the physical material, and then you have the thoughts and the ideas and the abstract or the spiritual and all those things. There's two different poles of, like, you have your ideas of how you understand it. I see outside here 6 different plants next to each other, and I can see that they are all the same plant. It's all a particular kind of tree. There's other plants in there that are not the same kind, but not amongst those 6 that stand in a row here. That's the same one. And that bit is a kind of abstraction that I make by looking at them. I synthesize it and can immediately see it's the same, even though they are completely different in so many ways.
Right.
So you have those two different things. You have the world of thinking or of ideas or the spiritual or whatever you want to call that, because some people might say that, well, it's God that created that, so you can recognize it. Or Plato might say it's the world of forms, which you recognize it as, even though they're all different. Then you have the material, and in between here, where you're merging those things that are coming from you, the ideas or whatever, my understanding of it is my relationship to it. And this overlaps strongly with what Friedrich Schiller talks about in his book called On the Aesthetic Education of Mankind, on the aesthetic education of man, that what ties these two things together, the real world in terms of physical objects and your ideas, which can be seen in how to relate, is through this intermediate stage or way of being, which is play. He says you're only fully human when you play, and only by playing are you fully human. You don't have to react to the thing out of necessity and instinct. Animal comes, I kill, I eat. Animal comes, other animal, and I run away. You don't have to react just to the what is nature dictates of you. You can make choices in here, and just because you think one thing and about something doesn't mean that you need to act on it or whatever. Those are like 2 aspects, and the way that you are continually weaving this is by playing with it, holding things loosely. And he calls one of those the idea of the world of the sensuous, what you get through the senses, and one that you get through the world of forms. And then in the middle you have the act of play, which is a living shape. You're shaping reality in a living kind of way, which is another sort of process. So that was a very complicated way of saying it. But
no, it was great.
By playfully approaching the world, and we will then go into, in the next episode, talk about what the criteria are more. But in a way, you already know what play is. It's only because we're talking about it in so much detail that you don't. But playfully right. Interacting with, like when I am irritated and with people, when I'm irritated with you, I am usually not in a playful encounter with you. So remembering what play actually is can realign you into that, which is then it becomes like a form of meditation, where mindfulness meditation as well, where you see the things for what they are and don't bind yourself to your feelings. If I'm irritated now, I can go, oh, I'm irritated, but I don't need to be irritated. You can let that drop. That's not a fact of your existence. You can, if you choose to and choose not to hold on to it, let it drop. So when you interact with my dog, I can interact, I give you the food, I do all this, or the practical things, or I can playfully interact with you, and a completely different world comes into being through approaching my dog in a certain way, through approaching you in a certain way, playfully, like we're playing and holding ideas lightly here and jumping around and letting ourselves be diverted or whatever. It's like a intellectually playful way of interacting. And whenever I fail as a husband with my wife, it's usually play is not absent. And the best moments of our life, I think, are frequently cited as the moments when we are playfully being present in the moment, self-motivated. We are there. We understand the rules, but we're playing with the rules rather than just conforming to the rules. And not just listing some of the criteria that comes up throughout this episode, and that we'll talk about in the next episode.
Well, it's a perfect segue to the next one, which is obviously directly related to this. But I want to, by the way, Frodo, really well said what you just said. It was great. But let's drill it down back to more concrete performing centered focus.
Yeah, perfect.
So basically you're talking about Teddy, and then you know, how Teddy engages you, lets you know he wants to play. And it says that I find that the dog has this sense of meaning, that he's now swapping into an altered state of meaning. Yep. Right? So like he's entering into the zone of play. So my question,
it's the play bow.
Yeah, exactly.
He puts his legs down on the ground, just for the people who can't remember what's going on. I'm looking at him. He puts his feet down and he bows all the way down and puts his on, and his face is a picture of enthusiasm. He's like ready to go, and he might tap his front legs because he's so excited. So, and this is an invitation to play. He's changing the mode for us to be.
And once you say, yes, we're going to play, then he enters this altered state of meaning, is what you said. And my question is, okay, so we talked a lot about today already some tactics that you use, like on that corporate event in Norway, of the rhythm, really specifically of how you went into the start of that show to meet the audience. But my question is, can you think of any specific way that you cue the audience in and let them know, hey, we're going to enter an altered state of meaning now? Because again, that's another fun way to kind of look at the start of an act or the start of a performance. Again, it's not any language I've ever encountered before in terms of practical, you know, my experience of my life. Of course, I can find parallels in my previous work where I can say, oh, this is where I'm actually letting the audience know we're in an altered state of meaning. But like, yeah, do you have any sort of moments that you can think about, or like tactics or tricks or concrete things where you're like, or challenges even where it's like, oh man, the audience doesn't understand yet that we're in this altered state of meaning. I have to clue them into that somehow. Like, yeah.
I think the play bow is a very primitive example, but it still shows an amazing level of understanding about ways of being together. That he understands that we can be in one way, and then when we bow, then we engage, and now a bite doesn't mean a bite anymore, and a bark doesn't mean a bark, because he never barks or bites me. But when we play, those things are totally okay, because they mean something else. So what's the equivalent of the play bow? And the play bow is already, by the time you've bought the ticket, you bought a ticket to this experience. You're now ready for what's coming in. And this experience is other than everyday life. Sitting down in rows in a darkened place, you're already bought in. You know it's funny. So by the time somebody comes out now, I am already participating in what my expectation of it is. So in the best case, Ricky Gervais will come out on stage, or Hannah Gadsby comes out on stage, and you already think it's kind of funny already. Like they just come out and the way they behave, it's already like, and you. So to me, the play bow is much more sort of like it is just the commitment that we are in this thing, and this thing is now going to be an experience which is other than everyday life, not just because of the weirdness of sitting down and watching somebody, but because we're going into a shared experience where I am watching somebody who is somebody who I like, and who is a master of creating certain kinds of experiences that are other than everyday life. And they sit down, and that's already the play bow, and they go in, and then they go they will, even if it's a famous person, maybe for the first 5 minutes, 7 minutes, they will be laughing and go, but then if you aren't actually good, if you didn't put in the work and this is not actually funny, then the thing will crumble and fall apart and be a bad experience for everybody, and going, and I love Star Wars, but I have had experiences where I now go and sit down either for the TV or for the movies or the Alien franchise. I so want it to be good. And then halfway through, I'm going, fuck, I gotta give in. I'm not moved by this.
Yeah.
I want it to. I so want it to be good, and I'm not caught by it. Why? What's wrong? So maybe the play bow is already just that sitting down and acknowledging that we're going to watch a show, or we sit down and we're ready to listen to a lecture, or we sit down and we're ready to partake in the ceremony.
Cool. Well, no, that play bow, that's great, man. Like what you just said, like even just the process of like maybe searching online to go see a show, or you see a poster in the city and you look it up, or you get a word of advice from a friend. Oh, you got to go see this thing. And then there's the act of purchasing the ticket. There's the act of getting ready to go and being on time. It's going to start at 8. I don't want to be late.
Dressing up or not.
You're dressing up. But also then, but now you're making me think about other play bows, which is really fun, because there are shows that like email you before the show. I've had that for a few times, and that's kind of trendy. It's like you get an email before the show, you have to read it. There's a bunch of activities. There's related material. You get into the world a little bit before you arrive. There's a play bow. I never thought of it like that, but of course it is. You're by participating in the material of that email, you are explicitly like agreeing to play along in the whatever you're going to go see. So that's another way to do it. But also, now we're talking about different styles of performing or different venues. For example, I guess the street show has a pretty brutal play bow compared to like playing in Mad Apple for you. Like, because on the street, it literally is the play bow of like, hey, do you want to stop and like play with me for a second?
Yeah.
Right. And yeah, that's so fun.
And then there's the whole technique of getting them involved, because it's not enough just to go out and go, all right, it's going to start. You got to make them into an audience. And that is, you're doing the play bow and you're stopping a few people. And then maybe those people who you stop first, who is like, they just stop because you popped a paper bag behind them. They now are part of the performance, and other people are watching that. So those people might walk away soon, but they are now like the interaction with, can he make them play or not? That can be the seed of what the show actually evolves out of. But it has to do with, I'm being playful. I'm inviting to play. I'm inviting into a different kind of meaning. You guys are walking about, going buying your food, but I am changing the situation here in this particular space. I'm creating a show space, a stage, a place where showtime happens and things function by other rules.
That's crazy, though. You're totally right. I've seen so many street shows where the play bow is what doing a play bow is the play bow. So like you're bowing down to these 2 or 3 people, trying to get them to stop, and of course you're doing that on purpose to make a scene that other people will watch you, trying to watch them to watch you. Like it's a meta play bow.
In a way, it's meta, but it's also, you're creating a real event. And I am going in and I'm changing the modes of behavior. And for those 2 people, they might complain and said, I was accosted by a man who laid down on the ground beforehand and whatever, and they walk away. But to all the other people, they are seeing some people who somebody is saying, hey, life is happening right now. And they are going, I refuse to participate. And watch somebody do that. Come on, guys. Is like, you know, inappropriately, it can be like a dog humping your leg who's going, this is going to be awesome, and you're going, this is not awesome.
Well, can you remember how you used to start a street show back in the day? Do you have any tactics? Like what was your crowd building technique back in the day?
In my first in the street show that I did when I was in Copenhagen, I would start putting out some things first. Set my suitcase, open it up and set it up, just to sort of go, hopefully get a few people there. And then once I'd sort of set out a couple of little things, I would look around and stand still and look. And I would usually wait until I had a couple of people standing, so then I could look with them and I could look at them and go like, this is going to be awesome. And I would take out a banana and I'm going, this is going to be great. And now even that, like just being interested, and I'll unfold and I'll peel the banana really slowly and carefully on the street, which is already kind of funny with a few people standing watching.
Yeah.
And then I take the banana out, and then I would start to look to go and like, oh, where am I gonna? I need to put this somewhere. And then I go, oh, okay, there's nowhere to put it. So I would put the banana in my pocket. And then I would take the banana peel.
Yeah.
And I would casually walk over and lean on something or whatever. And then when somebody walked out, I would throw the banana peel down on the ground and I would stand and look away. And I would, in the beginning, throw it so that they could clearly see it and just walk past it so it wouldn't be a chance of anything. And the more people I got, the more it started to close off, of course, but then I would throw it closer and closer, and then I would throw it and they would walk past it, and I'd crawl over and grab it and throw it again, and then eventually I'd like hold it and try and put it under their shoe as they were walking. Right. And this would be interspersed with me going back and setting up my props. And one of it, I had one fire torch, and I'd get it out and I hold it up and I'm going, this is going to be amazing. Not speaking, I'm just showing it. This is going to be great. And then I take out the kerosene bottle, which had a child lock on it, so you can't open it. It's just one of those you got to push down. And so I would push and I'm going, this is going to be amazing. And I had a little red coffee mug that I put the thing in, and it's going to be great and everyone can see. And I'd unscrew and I couldn't make it happen. And I go, wow. I put it down and I throw the banana peel for a while, and I'm going, and I go back and I tried to unscrew the thing and I couldn't make it work. Did that a couple of times. Next time I go back, I take my machete and I'm trying to cut the top off so I can get the thing out. It wouldn't work. Throw the banana peel some more, and then I go, oh, I can't make this work. And by now I can't do the banana peel so much because, and I had a photo camera too, so that once I'd done it and worn out the gag, I threw the banana peel and I would throw myself on the ground to see if I could catch a snapshot of them falling. And then I would go, I can't make this work. We're going to put this on fire, like just showing it with my things. And I'd go, I hold a bottle, and then I'd go, here, you sort this out. And I get the kid to come out, and the kid goes out, and I've now unscrewed it. So they just have to lift the top off. So they screw a little bit, and then they take the top off, and I'm going, oh my God, everybody clap for the kid. And then right. I would take the lid back, and then I would take the bottle back, and in that moment I would give him the banana to hold that I take out of my pocket. And then then you have this situation where it just goes 1, 2, he's got the banana, and I'm going, thank you so much, and you can have that, thank you very much. And now he got the banana, which has been in my suit pocket for the whole time. And that was kind of a proud build.
Cool, man. Dude, that's so awesome to hear. I guess if people want to buy the banana street show starting gag, they can email you to franchise the bit. I just had one more question for you, which is directly related, of course, to all this about episode 103. To wrap up here, basically, the quote from the episode is like, it's abundantly clear that a state of play is different from ordinary everyday behavior, and this means that it has a definite start and a definite end. And my question for you is, in a performance, is the ending of a state of play, is it ever a problem for you? Like I can think of in my life, I like in many ways, I guess the ending of play, it's pretty easy. The show's over. And we can talk about, because we talked a lot today about the beginning of an act or a show. And of course, you can start to talk about the end of an act or a show as well. But like in general, I would say probably 99% of the time, the ending of this state of play, this altered state, it's self-evident. It's like, it's a blackout. It's like the house lights come on. It's whatever, you know. The band has played the second encore, and you just know that then the state of play is done because they're not going to do a third encore or whatever, right? But I can think of a couple of examples in my life where this ending, because like you say, play has a definite start and a definite end. And then I was trying to think of places where like the end was ambiguous or maybe even dangerous or something. So like one example is there's this band from LA called the Eels. And by the way, it's Mark Oliver Everett, I think's his name. He's a terrible person. Bad guy. I opened for the Eels once with Marcus Monroe, and that's a whole story. They were not cool. But they did a bunch of kind of art rock stuff once in a while. And one thing the Eels did on one of their tours, 15 years ago, is they would play. So Mark, he's kind of I guess he has like chronic depression, and the only way he kind of feels alive is when he's on stage performing. So they would already play like a 3-hour long set every night as the main show of the concert. They play 3 hours long, but then the concert would be over. The house lights come up. The security is like not aggressively clearing the venue, but they're starting to clean up the beer cans and stuff from the floor, right? And if you waited 1 hour after the show was done, they came back out and played another 1 hour long set. And it became this kind of secret thing, of course, because, again, 99% of the people, when the show was after a 3-hour concert and the house lights come on, they've done all the encores and everything, people just go home. But then the hardcore fans who read the secret blog on the internet, who knew the deal, that the play wasn't done, that it wasn't the end yet, that if you waited around and you paid another hour of your time, you got a secret extra 1 hour long concert of like new stuff, unreleased tracks or whatever. So that's like one instance of like the play not being like that the play has a definite stop, but it was a fake stop, and that was kind of fun, I thought. And the second, and so I did that once actually. We did a festival in Belgium where 13 of the graduates from the Swedish circus school program in juggling, we went to Belgium and did a festival. And so we did like a whole day of like Swedish juggling shows. And then I was really inspired by this Eels thing. And so then after the program was officially done, an hour later, we did like a midnight show for just like, 8 people who happened to still be hanging around. And we did like a full hour long performance for them of like stuff we hadn't done earlier in the day. I don't know. That was kind of fun because then the play, that sense of play, it's extended beyond the initial experience of what you think it's going to, that initial expectation. I think that's really fun. The second thing is that we did this show. So Victor Gilligan, here in Sweden, he was approached like, I don't know, 20 years ago by somebody who owned a library and said, or like ran a library and said, "Hey, do you have a circus show for a library?" And Victor's like, "No." Like, what? Why would I do that? And then the person said, "Well, if you had a circus show that played in a library, I have money, I could hire you." And so he started doing performances in libraries, and that eventually turned into um, me and Luke Wilson doing the shows in libraries, and then when Luke died, Eric took his place. That's how me and Eric started working together. But that first show of doing a circus show in a library, Victor and I were talking about it, and it was like, "Hey, what are you going to do?" And Victor's a juggler, by the way. He's a student of mine from the Sweden school, and so we were talking about like, "Oh, what do you do in a library? Like, what's circus for a library?" And of course, the first level idea, the base level idea is like, "Oh, you're going to go juggle books or something." Like, it's about juggling the objects in a library. It's a one-to-one mapping of like circus in a library, right? Maybe you balance a coat rack on your head or whatever. But of course, I didn't find that, we didn't really think that was so cool. And because also in a library, there's like some level of respect and reverence for books as objects. You don't want to just like casually toss them around. That's like not very culturally cool. But we thought, no, what does a library actually represents is knowledge. It embodies knowledge. Like a library, holds knowledge as its function. And so then we thought, okay, maybe the circus show is going to be around embodying knowledge. Like, what kind of knowledge does circus embody that you can't capture in a book? And that kind of became the idea of the show. But one thing we wanted to do was we wanted to leave a trace of the show, in the library, that people could check out the show. Like, you check out a book, you could check out and borrow the show and take it home. So we made a little kit that was like, juggling balls with instructions, with activities. I forget what was in the kit, but that was another way of thinking, like, the play is done, but the play isn't done. Like, the show lives on kind of in eternity in these libraries, and we would just leave a kit in each library, which is also the Alien show with Eric Langekel, where we buried the time capsule behind every theater, which contained the evidence of the show that you could reverse engineer the performance. So I think there are so, like, when I first heard this quote, like, from your podcast, like, there's a definite start and a definite end, and I was like, oh, is there ever a problem to end the play? Or is there ever evidence or like a moment where the play kept going on even though it was finished? And then I thought of these few examples. But have you ever had a problem ending the play where the show's done but the audience won't let it be done, or the audience is confused because you think it's done but they didn't think it was done? Like, do you ever have an example of that?
No, not that I can sort of quite think of where it's been a problem or so. And I guess I am approaching this a little bit more like a game between three children can end at any point. If one person says, I don't want to play anymore, then the game has just like it evaporates. It's just done. Or the football game is finished when the time is allotted, and anything else that happens now on the pitch or whatever can also emerge into be a play, or also be approached playfully or whatever. But that first thing is now gone, or is done. And the reason why I'm talking about this is like that is because if the play bow is an invitation into a different way of meaning, like it's a different way of making sense of the world and making sense of what happens, once play has stopped, then the situation reverts back to something else. So if you're tickling someone and they say no and it's all fun and games, but at some point maybe it's now turning into abuse.
Yeah.
And if that person says no, then this isn't a game anymore. And one person might think so, and we need to know the separation between. And kids don't have a trouble with that, I think,
right.
in general. Like, so, but with and with the show, but what you're talking about is to play with the idea of when something stops and starts.
Right.
Because if you, for instance, then said you can play with it and going, okay, thank you very much, everyone, and that's all. Thanks for coming. That's excellent. And then I walk over to the side of the stage and I start to juggle and do stuff. Now they're going, what? Like, but I would also like to see this. What are you doing now? Like, if you go over and start something new and you've said it's done, now you're playing with that fact or whatever.
Oh, sorry. I just remembered. I have a great example of when it was a freaking problem, dude. It was bad news. Me and Brian, sorry if I can interrupt. So me and Brian, we were doing our show at the EJC, the European Juggling Convention in Amsterdam, 2014 or 15 or something. And it was in a town square, and we had 1,500 jugglers around us in a square. And then I had this idea. We did our hour-long show, and I told Brian, I go, hey, it'll be super funny. At the end of the show, we're just going to run away. We're just going to, in the middle of, the finale, just follow me. And I'm just going to jump out of the crowd, and me and you are just going to run down, because we're in the city center. We weren't in a circus tent or anything. It's the city center of Amsterdam. We're just going to run down the street out of sight, and that's going to be the end of the show. It'll be really funny or surprising or stupid or whatever it is. But dude, it backfired. As we jumped out of the crowd and started running, they started following us. Because, of course, this is an unrehearsed, untested, stupid idea that I didn't think through all the way. And they ran after us, and they wouldn't stop chasing us. Like, no matter how far we ran, they just kept following us. And so finally there was an ice cream store. And I said to Brian, let's go to the ice cream store and get some ice cream. like that's going to be the end of the show. And people will clearly understand that the show's over. So there was a little like cafe tables in the front of the ice cream store. So we ran in the ice cream store, got ice cream, and went and sat down outside the cafe and started eating ice cream. And people still stood there and watched us as if we were still doing the show.
Yeah,
and like there was,
you'd lost the, you had successfully gone, we're playing here and we're doing all of that, and then you did the chase. So now we're playing, and now they're watching you, and now you have successfully done what I guess celebrities do, where they're going, I am an event just by sheer existence. So now you just eating ice cream, they don't know if it's done or not, or if something is going to spark up again or whatever. So they watch it thinking that it could potentially go, and you can't act normally with Brian because you have people watching you, so you're also kind of giggling and being, if not performative, you're sort of deliberately trying to shy away. So now it's self-conscious, and it's like you can't quite turn it off. So that's really interesting.
Yeah. That's always dumb. But I mean, there is another, and I don't know if this is, I mean, of course we're talking about play, and we can look at play through like everything through play. It is that thing I talked about before. Just yesterday we were talking back and forth about the ending of a show. For example, with me and Eric, our work is really A, B, C, D. That's the structure of the show. Here's this idea. Here's Newton's cradles. Here's a vacuum cleaner. Here's the next idea, right? Magnet clubs comes next. But there's no real clear red through line except for ourselves. And we don't have a real definite character. It's just us, like on a more pedestrian everyday level that's not elevated or amplified. And then the only other thing left in the show is the rhythm, the arc of the rhythm of how we present things. And I think it's not easy. It's not like totally easy, but it's not that hard to get into that rhythm, to let the audience know, hey, you're going to watch something and you're going to watch something else. You're going to watch something else. Like that's kind of okay to get into, but to end it is really hard because people don't know that it's the end. Because once I show you one next thing and one next thing and one next thing, like in our mind, we've rehearsed the show. We know it's the ending when we do the magnet clubs, but like we don't have a clear theatrical theme that is resolved through there being magnet clubs. So there's other tricks that we need to, or other techniques of theatricality we need to employ to let people know it's the end of the show. For example, a blackout or turning the music off. But I think that's also, again, there's different techniques to confront these challenges of play. And I think like just doing a blackout at the end of the show is maybe a bit boring way to kill the play, or, you know what I mean? You can kill the play in different ways. But that's also another example of like, people are playing with us. Oh, they're going to show us a new thing and a new thing and a new thing. But at some point it has to end. And how do they know it's the end without seeing the show before? And that's a challenge I have, I think, in terms of letting them know the play is done, that they can do the final applause and all that.
Yet they are fully 100% on board with the fact that play will end.
Yeah.
We will revert back to normal way of operations. And it can be done as easy as, even if you literally, you have a bunch of kids together and it's like, okay, playtime is over. And then they go, oh no. And then you start the next task or whatever. So it's like, it's by you just throwing the last club and whatever you do, standing there for a second or turning the lights off or taking a bow or say, thank you very much or whatever, they all goes, oh, that was the end of this kind of thing. And then when you come out and you say, oh, that was so cool to perform for you guys or whatever, they know we are now in a different way of relating to each other or whatever.
I mean, what we actually do in reality is we cheat So because the end of the show is we just turn it into a workshop and there's no stop. It's just like we just say, and now for the next part of the show, we need your help. So everybody stand up, and then you're just into the workshop, and we kind of cheat as the end of the show. We kind of skip that moment and we just turn it into something else. And then at the end of that, we're talking. So then we can say, thank you for coming. That's the end. And like we literally say that. But then we're talking in the workshop. So it's kind of funny. I never thought of it like that before. But yeah, that's how we do it.
But it is also, it's like, I would say this to finish up, but it's not all times, not all ways to pay attention to things are the same. There is a time that we can have together, which is what the play bow signifies. Now we're going to do something which is different. So Monsieur Eliade says, he uses fancy words and he says, time is not homogeneous, it's heterogeneous, in that certain times are of a different significance. And he's talking about in relation to the sacred. But when we all sit around and we prepare to do a ritual or to do a ceremony, or to have a shared sense of a different kind of time, sacred time, an experience of being together in a different way than we are when we normally deal with the humdrum aspects of life. So, but this time, by the very nature of what goes on in this time, is unlike what's going on in profane time. The sacred time is when we all, through the preparations to get into the ritual or through the preparations to get ready to go into the show, we go through a whole bunch of stuff. We have to be there at a specific time. We have to do all this stuff. We have to cleanse the space or whatever if you're doing a certain sacred thing, or you have to get ready, or the lights come down and the focus goes down. And we all prepare to go, to be there, to share this significant moment of time and attention where we will experience time differently. We will all focus on the same thing. 100 people will be facing one, which will be leading us towards the experience of one thing, something that either that they have planned in a juggling show or a show, or the leading of a ceremony or a ritual, which will enact again, or it will give us the celebration of spring, of Easter, of death and resurrection, of new life springing forth. At least that's the way it is in the northern hemisphere. Easter happens at the same time that the first life comes out. So it's a time when we get together and we have prepared ourselves and gotten into to have this exceptional thing that human beings can do, where we all are together and share an event. Birds also sing, but they sing to each other. They don't join up and sing all together, even in harmony with each other, singing the same song at the same time, all as one group. There's a lot of birds tweeting, but they're all sort of individuals. We get together and we can sing, or we can sing along to the song from our favorite artist, or we can sing a religious song or something that's connected to our nationality or whatever thing it is, or we can just participate in this shared event. And that time, I think, which is what happens in between human beings, this playful time, is where we get stories, it's where we get art, it's where we get human culture. All the most important things happen in this other time, which in the end of my manifesto says, I call it showtime. 100% artificial and therefore completely human. Showtime. That is what we create, a different time, and sacred time, you could call it, or playtime.
Great. So, well, that's episode 103, man.
2 hours and 13 minutes of recording for this here, and I had that other bit from the other bit, and I thought I was going to connect to it, but maybe I have to divide it up into, really good. But the wide-spanning thing, and I guess that's what these conversations are. like good point or whatever. That starts out with one word, and we're talking about a specific subject, and we're talking about our experiences and life and whatever. And some of these examples or whatever, I go on for ages, and you go on for ages and tell a whole 5-minute story about all sorts of stuff. So hopefully, and my goal for these kind of conversations too, is that it just concretizes some of the more abstract things that I talk about. And although the last section of this whole season, I take each of those 5 criterias, and although each person by the end of this hopefully can make their own connections to their own work, what these things are, but I do try to spell out. It's not a whole episode on each, because some of them I don't say quite as much or whatever, but I talk for 10, 15, 20 minutes, and some of them for a long time, about what the implications would be to try to connect these things to it. But I guess the overall arching thing of this is not for it to be a first go out, smile, and invite play or whatever. Like, it's not a practical book per se. But that leads us into that we were talking about doing a separate line of inquiry on practical showmanship.
I mean, I think for me, my agenda in these conversations about your episodes is almost like a discussion with my former self, to my younger self, where I think, like, for me, when you say stuff like you have to give attention to get attention, you have to be interested to be whatever the fuck. I could hear that when I was younger and be like, yeah, that sounds really important or something. But it just sounds like so like conceptual and like not connected to my everyday life. Like, if I just think about the 20-year-old jugglers in the Sweden school now, and if I go to them and I say, hey, you know, you have to give attention to get attention, they'll take me seriously, which is nice. And they'll smile and nod, and they'll, in their brain, they'll say, oh yeah, that's really important. That's a good point. But they don't, it's nothing for them. Like, it's not in their reality, right? Like, they're just not at the level yet to have that to be useful to them, I think. At least in the discussions I've set up with them, I know that they can't. So then I love it when I talk to you now, and I'm just like, hey man, you said this huge conceptual thing that makes a lot of sense. It's like so important, but like, do you have a simple example or like a concrete example of what you do? And then when you explain like how you meet the audience and all these little things, I think it's so cool, because I think then the kids, or like younger me, can understand that like we can talk about really big, heavy conceptual thoughts, but that doesn't have to mean that the practice of those things has to be huge and heavy and weird. Oh, no. And it's very simple.
Rather to the contrary.
Exactly.
It's like, it's back to that thing of going, I wanted to write you a short letter, but I didn't have time.
Right.
So I'm doing all of this conceptual heavy lifting for us to understand what the process is. But so the book, as I'm writing it now, and the book is currently now titled Facing the Other Way, subtitle, Towards a Philosophy of Showmanship. So what that book, I take the manifesto poem, I am a showman, first and foremost, it's a showman I am. And a showman is someone who faces the other way. And that, which basically just says who a showman is and then describe doing a show. That becomes the picture of the way of the showman, and I unpack that over 300 pages or so, what that actually means. And I try to link it back. So this is like all the epic scope of 300 pages is there in the poem as these little instigators of what happens. Well, for the show to happen, the verse goes, a showman calls for attention and has something to show when he gets it.
There you go.
It's that simple or terse. But when I write about that, so that's those two things. What does it mean to what does attention mean, and what does it mean to have something when they're there? I think that chapter is 18,000 words. So it's huge bits of stuff that talks about it, but it's a simple process. And the reason why we talk so much is so that if you have these thoughts in your head when you meet the audience, they can feel it. It's not just something you thought of in the pub.
Right.
It's part of your very being, and it's part of your way of understanding the world. So you become a more mature artist by having thought these things. And as nature is, when I was a kid, I was also mainly interested in the tricks, mainly interested in the skills and all those things.
Right.
But I've gone along the whole way and had this interest for this other stuff, but I didn't know where it was. So I didn't find a book that was written just about that, because it was all juggling with finesse, tricks, a complete juggler, or the art of, in magic, Eugene Berger. There was stuff there that I was definitely attracted to reading his columns because he studied theology and he had a different approach to these things and he thought more philosophically, and I was leaning in that direction, but I didn't know which book it was to read. And that's what this book and what this podcast is kind of all about, finding that language, so that when Luke says something or whatever book that we talk about, I go, yep, there you go. That's an expression of that. To constantly be able to take it back either to the chapter on attention and what it means to actually have something to show. What do you have that lives inside you that is worthy of 1,300 people giving you their full time and attention for 13 minutes or 1 hour? What do you have that's worthy of that kind of attention, that can withstand that kind of scrutiny and not just be tolerated, but be celebrated? Yeah. Big questions, and you can get them back down to that tiny little line in the poem. And that's all I need then for the students to remember. They just remember these key little things and going, each one of these aspects is deeply important. It's a whole study in itself. And for you to know that when people go, oh, is this your real job? You're just doing entertainment. And you're going, when you say that, oh, you're just doing entertainment, it's just like saying to the priest, well, do you not do another job? Because you're just really doing religion. And you can say that about anything, but it's actually really deep. All right. We got to be careful not to just go on for another hour. So let's just say thank you so much for the conversation. And it's been totally awesome.
Yeah, man. This was super fun. I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah. Talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks, Frodo.
All right. We've gone on and we have shared lots. So I'd just like to ask you to, if you do enjoy this podcast, just click subscribe so that this podcast gets pulled into whatever app of choice that you use to download these episodes. And maybe find The Way of the Showman on Instagram, see what's going on there. Every now and then I post some good stuff. A lot of time I don't. But it would be nice if I did that you were there checking it out. Until next time, take care of yourself and those you love, and I really hope to see you along the way.